Hey guys, tonight we're taking a seat in a place where your barber and your surgeon are the same person, seriously. In the 14th century, the man wielding the razor was also your best option for amputating a leg or drilling your skull. Anesthesia? Not a thing. What you got instead was speed, a goblet of wine for courage, and a prayer no one would botch your haircut or your surgery. There were no medical schools for these folks. Just a lot of practical experience and the unsettling confidence you'd expect from someone who got their start giving shaves. The sound of a bone saw was sometimes the closest thing you got to bedside manner. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's awake and exploring history with me. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's get into it. Step into my study. The door clicks behind you, muffling the drizzle outside. It smells of candle wax, iron, and a faint trace of singed cloth. An odd comfort if you've been here before. On my desk, tonight's guest, a medieval bone saw, its handle scored by 100 anxious hands. You run your fingers over leather that should never have seen so much use. In the dark corners, jars of trembling leeches and cloudy spirits watch you back. The candle flickers every time you shift in the hard chair. You hear a clock ticking, and somewhere, metal clinks in an old instrument tray. Imagine being told to bite down on a stale leather strap while a barber, in his best red and white apron, reassures you with total, almost heroic confidence. We'll find something tonight about how survival and spectacle often shared the same room, and behind each cut, there's a stranger logic than you think. Of all the strange things that have ever happened in a chair, medieval European surgery is near the top. Think about it. In most rooms where someone asks you to sit and relax, you might be expecting a haircut, not an amputation. But in the 13th century, the line between those two was, let's say, optimistic. Maybe you notice the red and white pole out front. Classic barbershop branding. That's not a nod to peppermint or old-fashioned charm. That's actually a symbol for blood and bandages. Not exactly subtle wellness ink, is it? Your whole village knows about this place. You step inside and the room smells of boiled linen and sour ale. It's half salon, half emergency room, and not certified for either. There's a fire somewhere just out of sight, roasting God knows what. Above it, a long iron rod is slowly heating up. He'll say it's for your own good, and call it cautery. The last patient left behind a trail of crushed rosemary and nerves. You wait your turn. You're not here for a shave. You have a rotting tooth, or a festering wound. Something swollen and ominous. Mostly the tools are the same. Scissors, razors, sharp knives. But the mood is much less soothing. The water isn't exactly clean, but it's tepid and sloshing. You wonder if anyone actually enjoys that dripping sound from the bucket in the corner. Look around the shop. It's lively, but not in a good way. Men are shouting. A boy stirs something sticky in a pot. An old woman dabs at her arm, whispering prayers under her breath. Every so often you hear a grunt and the clinking of metal against metal. Sometimes a patient limps out with fresh linen tied on, looking pale but alive. That's about the best Yelp review you're going to get. Nobody calls the barber surgeon a hero. But he's confident, too confident. He's one of the few who knows how to take a limb off before it kills you. That, in this century, is a life skill with high demand. The local priest can always promise you heaven, but the barber's the only one offering short-term solutions. His apron is red and white, of course it is. The blood and bandages look is simple, direct, and never gets less relevant, no matter what job he does today. Sometimes he runs out of bandages halfway through. He'll ask if you've brought your own linen. That's the real medieval twist. You're expected to bring your own supplies. Bandages, clean cloth, something to bite down on. It's like a medical Airbnb, except the experience rating is, will probably survive, but will never sleep again. Let's talk about your day. How did you end up here? Maybe you tripped on a muddy path, or a blade slipped during that job you can't afford to lose. Maybe someone at the tavern owed you money, and didn't want to pay. The wound looked bad before you even limped home. There's no antibiotics, no Tylenol, no insurance, no gentle consultation hour. There's just this. A man with a steady hand, a favourite knife, and an attitude that dances somewhere between absolute faith and over-eager salesmanship. He only kind of listens as you describe the problem. What's important in his mind is not how you feel. It's how fast he can work before you faint, or punch him, or die. That's his survival strategy, and yours. Like a pizza place that brags about delivery in under 30 minutes, or your wound is free. This business model is based on speed and spectacle. Nobody pays extra for bedside manner. The patients don't get to see the price list in advance. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's pay what you can. Sometimes you hope your family comes back with eggs or wine as a tip. The tools are clean, by medieval standards. That is to say, they are neither muddy nor rusty, and sometimes they are waved through a flame. He's proud of his set. He'll show you each one. A little saw, a sharp chisel, curved scissors, a bowl for catching runoff. He uses the same cheerful tone someone today might use when showing off a new set of golf clubs. If you're lucky, he lets you sit for a moment. The seat itself is narrow, hard wood, warmed by the last unlucky person. He'll ask you to hold steady. He may tie you with cloth, or have his apprentice hold you down. Privacy is not a concept here. You are the evening's entertainment. At least 3 people are watching. One of them offers you a slug of cheap brandy. Not to dull the pain, just to keep you from screaming quite as much. The village smells cling to you. Peat smoke, sheep, dried herbs shoved under your nose to cover other things. If it's winter, your breath comes in clouds. If summer, there's always the flies. The barber speaks with absolute assurance. He tells you not to worry, he's seen worse. He always says that. You don't know if that's true, but he seems convinced. He starts sharpening a knife with slow, showman's care, as if you were being prepped for a festive ham. Everyone knows the rules. No one should go under the knife alone, not if you can help it. Someone in your family, or the neighbour who owed you a favour, stays close. They don't look at you, but they don't leave. Even hardened villagers turn green when it's their turn. In this society, no one is really brave, just resigned, or unlucky, or stubborn enough not to run. The barber washes his hands, but not really. It's a dip and a wipe. He talks the whole time, sweet reassurance and cutting jokes. He drops Latin words he half remembers from someone who actually studied at the university. You know he thinks it makes him sound wise. To you, it's just noise. The open window brings in the sound of church bells and livestock. Someone somewhere is laughing, and for a second, life just continues. Then a gust of cold air washes over you, and you catch an acrid whiff of hot iron. That's the cautery rod, today's version of a pop-up health alert. If you see it glowing, things are about to get spectacular. This is not a private crisis. Everything about this process is public. The shop, if you can call it that, is just a room with a wooden door and a little hearth. You sit in the only chair that doesn't rock. 1 bucket of water, 1 linen cloth, a table against the wall that holds the implements, and a shelf for clean bandages, not as many as you hope. Maybe you wish you lived somewhere else, anywhere else. But no place in Europe is better equipped. In fact, if you're in a town with a barber surgeon at all, you're lucky. This is the state of the art. Precision medicine, medieval style. Quick, blunt and improvised. If you want university-trained experts, you'd have to travel days or weeks to a city. Even then, most doctors with degrees don't perform surgery. They write treatises about bile and sell expensive potions. Surgeons cut, barbers cut more, and nobody wants to do either. What about anesthesia, you ask? That code has not shipped yet. There's wine if you can afford it, and maybe some poppy syrup if your barber is especially forward-thinking. But mostly, you get distraction and something to chew. If you're really lucky, someone tells you a story, as if it helps. Earlier that day, you probably watched him pull teeth. That's crowd-pleasing, even festive. Everyone cheers when the molar comes loose. The patient swears and spits into a bucket. The crowd roars approval, as if someone just scored in a village soccer game. Especially Nimble barber surgeons collect those teeth in a little jar, proof of their might and a warning to children. You want speed, above all. This is the part most people underestimate. The survival rate depends on the barber's ability to act before the patient truly realizes what's happening. Call it real-time crisis management. There's almost a choreography to it. A yank, a hot press, a fast wrap. If you hesitate, everyone loses. The barber's shop is open for all emergencies, from ingrown toenails to battlefield trauma. Children come in with broken bones or boils. Old women come for massaging of nerves. Drunks stagger in after a brawl, looking sheepish. No insurance card required, just the willingness to trust a man who, 2 hours ago, was trimming your neighbor's mustache. If you survive this, there's usually a feast. Not for you, but for your family. They bring bread and wine to the church to thank Saint Blaise or Saint Barbara, depending on who gets credit for your continued existence. There are stories and prayers, and everyone wants to see the bandage. Some want to see the wound, but your mother says no. For kids in this world, there's an entire genre of, if you don't behave, the barber will get you. Parents use it to scare them into sitting still at meals, doing chores, or not annoying the priest. In some towns, the barber even cuts off hair as a punishment, a warning to others. If you think this is a uniquely medieval disaster, look closer. Modern ERs have glossy tiles, battery-operated blood pressure cuffs, and nurses who talk in acronyms. But the pressure to act fast, to improvise, to believe things will probably work because someone said so? That part hasn't changed. Only the tone and the degree of paperwork, everything is done with ceremony. The curtain twitches, the chair is spun around, the assistants are summoned. If the procedure is major, the bell is rung to alert the local priest. There's always a candle burning, part ritual, part necessity. Light is expensive and fleeting. And nothing says reassuring clinical environment, like the shadow of your own profile, twitching against wattle and daub walls. Dress is simple. You wear your best shirt, or whatever doesn't have a rip from the last time you fell. The barber wears an apron, and maybe a hat if he's feeling official. His hands are usually stained. Dye, wine, blood, or all three. He calls this the look of a professional. A badge of expertise. What you eat beforehand becomes a piece of folklore. Some say fasting helps. Some say to eat extra bread for strength. One woman swears by onions. Everyone agrees you shouldn't drink too much. The barber pretends to care, but he doesn't really. Money is tricky. You might pay with coins, or barter. If things go badly, there's no refund policy. Bad reviews are mostly whispered, not written down. The only loyalty program is survival. If he saves your leg, you send your brother. If he takes your leg, you send your worst enemy. The walls are patched with old banners and tattered cloths. Sometimes there's a board with notes, lost sheep, things for sale, requests for prayers. If you could write, maybe you'd leave a warning. But most people can't. So, stories travel by mouth. The instruments are displayed on a wooden plank. They glitter because they are the only things that are ever really clean. Scraped and rubbed down for show, not sterility. Some are old enough to have names. One is called Little Bessie. Nobody asks why. Cauterization is a common fix. Wound won't stop? Sear it closed. The logic is weirdly sound if you know nothing about infection. Infection is a word but not a science. Bad air gets the blame for what you now know is bacteria. But the fire kills spirits, and in its own crude way, some germs. There's a logic to it. A desperate internal consistency you almost have to admire. If you want to get technical, university-trained doctors. Think surgeons are lower class. Manual labourers, they mutter. Real medicine is supposed to happen with words and diagnoses, not knives and towels. Surgeons, and therefore barber surgeons, are the startup disruptors nobody invited, hustling their way up the ladder with nothing but nerve and iron. There's even an unofficial hierarchy. The university guys call themselves physicians. They argue about the four humours and prefer silk robes and consulting fees. The barber surgeons are at the bottom, grubby, working class, proud. Then there are the wise women and herbalists, operating entirely outside the professional network, with even less respect and just as many patients. church bells mark the hours. Sometimes the only thing that lets you know how long you've suffered is the sound. There's no pain scale. No one asks you to rate your discomfort from 1 to 10 with a friendly face and a blanket. The closest you get is, don't faint and you'll be fine. Barber surgeons train by watching, listening, and practicing on the living. Usually they apprentice young. First you sweep the floor, then you hand the tools. Eventually, you get to pull teeth or lance boils. If you mess up, you're yelled at, slapped, or worse. The worst mistakes aren't catalogued. The best apprentices learn to move quickly and not dwell. Patients trust their barbers, not because they have a choice, but because the other options are limited. No referrals, no get a second opinion. If you complain, the village priest tells you to be thankful your soul is intact, and maybe your body will follow. The worst day is market day. That's when the shop is truly crowded. Travellers stopping for a quick patch-up. Locals bartering chickens for stitches. Children shoved ahead for a quick fix. It's like Black Friday with fewer discounts and more anxiety. You sit. You wait. Your stomach churns at the hot, slightly burned smell of iron. You watch the instruments laid out in a row and try not to think about which one will be used on you. Your hands sweat. Your feet tap. You remember what your mother said. Don't look. Sometimes you listen. Above the fireplace, the barber keeps his trophies. Odd bones, a nail, even a cracked skull. He calls them his museum. In a way, it's the first patient review wall. Each piece is a testament to survival, or at least a memorable afternoon. If you're lucky, the rain will keep everyone home, and you'll have privacy. But rain makes everything worse. Mud sneaks into the doorway, children crowd inside, the room fills with steam. Everything smells of animal and wood smoke. People mutter, roll their eyes, and wish for summer. The barber surgeon, despite his local fame, is always arguing with the church and the guilds. The church says only God can truly heal. The guilds argue about who can pull which kind of tooth. It's the original regulatory turf war. Not all surgery happens in shops. On the battlefield, things are even rougher. Wounded men are sorted by their odds of survival and their rank, not their preference. Amputations are the fix-all for most things that don't kill you first. The fastest surgeons get nicknames. Lightning Hand, Quick Thomas or Bloody Bill. You never want to meet Bloody Bill. No refunds, no receipts. That's the real horror. Survival comes down to someone's personal best lap time. If the limb is off in under a minute, you might live. If not, you become a warning tale to the next unlucky soldier. It's not medicine. It's competitive speed surgery. Every detail of the shop matters because every detail is a risk. Dust means infection. Dull blades mean pain and slow bleeding. A careless assistant means disaster. And yet, routine prevails. Tools are sharpened daily. Bandages are boiled. The room is swept, sort of. In a world with no real concept of germs, you do the best you can, using the logic you have. When things go well, it feels like a miracle. When they don't, you blame fate, bad air, or the evil eye. That's how the stories spread, not through scientific journals, but around benches and hearths, and the truth sits quietly in the corner. Humans do not change. Only the tools and the stories do. Confidence and improvisation are forever. Today, we look at these rooms and laugh. Quaint, we say, terrifying. But somewhere there's someone moving fast, with quiet assurance, in a harsh room, under bad lighting, trying their best to keep you alive. The ritual is different. The fear is the same. The barber's pole just got a little cleaner. Let me take you into the heart of a medieval morning. Not the sunrise mass, not the clatter of horseshoes in the square. No, you, on a bench outside the town's single barber surgeon's shop. And yes, you're here for something serious, something sharp and unnatural, tucked under your sleeve, or pulsing steadily under your skin. There's a cold dampness in the air. Ale and hay, and overheated tallow mix with the sharper, copper scent from inside. You stare at the red and white pole, spinning lazily above the door. It's supposed to be reassuring. Instead, you wonder which color represents you today. Old blood or fresh bandage. This is not, despite the sign, a barbershop with a dash of medicine. It's more like a trauma clinic powered by gossip, brute confidence, and kitchen utensils. The waiting room is just a stretch of wooden bench. You wipe your palms on your tunic. Sometimes, while you wait, you can hear someone inside biting down on leather. Sometimes you just hear singing, tuneless and insistent. Because the mind finds music where it can. You don't come here often. No one does willingly. But yesterday the swelling got worse, or your tooth went black, or your leg twisted the wrong way by bad luck and livestock. This is triage. Only the system is first come, first served, don't pass out. Eventually your name. You stand in a woolen world, heavy and scratchy and a bit too warm. The door opens. Inside the room isn't much. A plank table, a basin of cloudy water, baskets of rags. The barber surgeon gestures. You sit. There's not so much ceremony as resignation. Any prayers were done outside, and the only anesthetic is whatever prayer you can mutter under your breath, and maybe a mouthful of ale. Today the surgeon seems in a hurry. Maybe you're the first of many. Maybe he just dislikes being indoors. He wears an apron, stained with hope and other people's misfortunes. His tools are neatly laid out on a board. Knives, saws, tweezers. Most are multi-purpose. None look comfortable. You smell smoke from the nearby fire, the oily bitterness of lard, the faint ghost of something burning that isn't supposed to be burning. He asks a question, but it's rhetorical. The diagnosis isn't really in doubt. If you've made it here, it's because something is dramatically, unignorably wrong, and because to refuse help is dangerous in its own way. In town, everyone will know you didn't let the barber do his work. Here's where we pause and pull back, because what's happening inside this ordinary little room is the collision of tradition, necessity, and medieval theory. The barber surgeon is not a doctor in the modern sense. He is the workplace safety officer, the self-trained paramedic, the guy who fixes your mule and then your hand with the same knife. But he's also working under a robust, if misguided, philosophical system. Any mistakes are not sloppy, they're deeply intentional. The logic of medieval medicine is not the logic of cause and effect. Instead, it's a strange, internally consistent sort of poetry. Everything in balance. Hot and cold, dry and wet, humours swirling beneath your skin. A theory imported from ancient Greece by way of the Arabs, with Christian modesty layered thickly on top. Why cut into someone at all? Because the imbalance needs to be redressed, literally. Bloodletting isn't random violence, it's administrative action. The surgeon sees your swelling, your pain, your fevers. He thinks, something inside is blocked. Fluids want to move, but the river has dammed. What's needed is a sluice gate. There's no anesthesia because, well, what would you use? Opium is rare and expensive, alcohol slows movement more than pain. The best tools for comfort are speed, certainty, and distraction. Also, very strong helpers if available. The idea that pain might be unnecessary has not really entered the system. Pain is, to them, both a symptom and a pathway to cure. It proves you are alive. It signals change, even if unwelcome. And for many cuts and pulls, speed is everything. Hesitation is risk. Infection is not quite an explicit theory yet. But healing rarely happens fast, and everyone has seen what comes after a bad wound goes untreated. The wound is a race between the barber's confidence and your immune system, a duel neither of you fully understands. The barber's education is improvised. Some training comes from the guild, some from elder practitioners, but much is learned on the job, which is to say, on you. Certification is just a letter from another barber, or a priest who owes him a favour for the removal of a cyst or a very stubborn splinter. Barber surgeons were lower on the ladder than physicians. Physicians talked a lot about the body and rarely touched it. Surgery was manual labour, something best left to civilians. The barber surgeon was the technician, the maintenance worker, the guy who fixes the pipes, and never gets invited to dinner. But when you actually needed something fixed, a boil lanced, a leg straightened, an arrow removed, you didn't call the physician. You called the guy with the apron. Let's move closer to a real story now. Montpellier, 1327. We have a record, not a diary but municipal accounts and the weary pride of guild lawsuits. One surgeon stands out, Master John. He owns 4 knives, 3 saws, and a reputation for certainty. Too much certainty, according to the town doctor, who would prefer John go back to cutting hair and taking teeth. One particular February morning, grey, early, a soup of fog and wood smoke in the alleys. A young woman is brought in, not on her own but carried by two relatives. Nobody mentions what happened. Maybe it was a fall, maybe not. Her arm is swollen, hot, and bent at an angle nature didn't sign off on. Master John doesn't waste time on sympathy. He greets the family, then addresses the girl by her given name. "Best not look," he says. "I'll be swift." His only assistant is a boy who's almost as purple-nosed as the patient, and whose main job is pouring the water and pulling distractions from thin air. John wraps rags high and low on the woman's arm. He sets the bones as quickly as he can, in a way that will scandalize scholars for centuries. She bites a stick. The family stands, silent as saints. Setting the fracture takes not long. The aftercare is vinegar and tight bandages, a poultice made of comfrey, or maybe something handier. Later, much later, the girl will have a story about how a barber once put her together. Her arm won't be quite the same, but whose is? Master John is paid in bread and favours. He moves on to the next minor disaster. The town doctor, later that week, files a complaint to the city council. Barbers must desist from all but the simplest tasks. The council makes polite noises and does nothing. Master John keeps working. Let's take a minute with the tools. This is where the experience gets truly tactile. You are on that bench, and maybe you stare at the instruments to avoid looking at the patient before you. The knife is long, slightly curved, polished by years of mundane trauma. The saw is bone-handled, teeth set wide. There's a metal clamp with wooden screws, terrifyingly modern, like something from a bad European startup. Finally, a better way to keep limbs still. There's also the cautery iron, scorched and suspiciously greasy. Every object is multi-purpose. Everything is hard, cold and handmade. Oil lamp flickers on the blades. Shadows jump and distort. You can smell the iron, the last brass polish from weeks ago, the faint echo of lye soap. Sterility is not a concept. Clean is wiped down, mostly dry, not obviously filthy. Tools are precious, brought out only when absolutely necessary, sharpened and returned to their cloth wrappings with almost reverence. Yet, most are chipped, or bent just slightly off-center. If you are lucky, you do not watch as yours is selected. What does surgery look like if you are the one on the plank? A brief, unceremonious preparation. Ale, a strong person to hold your legs, a brisk, "Look here, not there." You feel the roughness of the table, unvarnished and sticky with generations of nervous sweat. The room is dim so no one sees too much, but bright enough that the barber can see what he must. Your senses become magnified. You remember the colour of the wall. You hear every grunt outside. The blade flashes, not overdramatic, but quick. There's a flurry of movement you try not to track. You hold your own breath and count silently backward, hoping that whatever happens is decisive, total, over before you run out of numbers. The truly unusual treatments are another carnival entirely. Consider the trepanation. That's right, you might show up with a bad headache, or fits, or the agonizing symptoms of cranial pressure, and the solution is to drill a hole into your skull. Yes, drill. The tools for this are old even then. A hand-powered burr sharpened by the last apprentice who survived. The barber seats you, wraps a cloth over your eyes, mumbles a prayer, and begins to twist. The sensation is indescribable, so let's skirt around it. Pressure, a deep vibration, sparks behind your eyelids. People survive this, not by sorcery, but because the barber was fast, the hole was small, and the worst complications hadn't been invented yet. Trepanation had logic on its side, strange as it feels now. Pressure was a thing to be released. Bad spirits, pestilential air, even the build-up of humours. And yes, sometimes a hole in the head relieved the pressure. Sometimes nothing happened at all. But it was a hierarchy of action, guided by internal philosophy. If nothing else worked, a bigger hole should let the trouble escape. The patient, by the way, is always you in these stories. No one volunteers for an experiment in the Middle Ages. It's always you, with your own ordinary problems, thrown into the deep end because there was no shallow end. You hope for a steady hand and a dose of something numbing. A small miracle, more often, is just making it home afterward with some pieces of yourself intact. If you are lucky, there is soup after. Soup is its own medicine in this world. Warm, salty, possibly nourishing, and mostly not lumpy. You clutch the bowl with shaking hands. Someone fusses over you, more as ritual than fact. The barber is mostly already on to the next thing. Daily routine is made of these pockets. Crisis, solution, cleanup, and then waiting. Most patients do not come back for follow-up. You either recover or do not, but the feedback form is just a rumor in the street. What happens next is everyone's favorite part. Consequence, unintended and otherwise. Sometimes it all works out, and the healing is ugly but functional. Fingers set at odd angles, teeth pulled so the pain stops echoing into the next village. The occasional miraculous survival of a head wound that would kill a lesser, less distractible species. But more often, there's a price. The wound festers. The patient develops a shiver and does not return. The town whispers blame, sometimes to the barber, sometimes to fate, usually to the patient's own weakness or a cosmic balance sheet. The biggest institutional error, truly, is the certainty. So many deaths are not accidents of the blade, but the neat logic that made using the blade feel inevitable. The barber surgeon is not a cruel man. He is, if anything, more intimately aware than anyone of how often luck trumps skill. But you can't hesitate. In a world with no painkillers, no antiseptics, and no real understanding of bacteria, it's speed and bravado or nothing. It persisted for centuries, not because people loved it, but because no one had a better story to tell. The alternative was to do nothing, and nothing has a very bad mortality rate. Eventually, the cracks in the system get too wide to ignore. The 16th century brings Ambroise Paré, former apprentice and eventual leader of the barber surgeons of France. He starts to question things. He runs out of boiling oil on a battlefield and, with supplies gone, uses a simple mixture of rose oil and egg yolk on wounds. The soldiers heal better. He publishes his heresy. Perhaps the old book is not always right. Perhaps doing less is sometimes more. Institutions don't move fast, even in wartime. The legend goes that Paré's colleagues thought him reckless, subversive, and a threat to good order. But his results were obvious. Suddenly, the best surgeons aren't the fastest, but the most observant. Cleanliness, gentleness, and aftercare turn out to matter. The concept of infection takes shape, but only after centuries of confidence mistakes. It's fascinating where this journey leads, isn't it? The biggest pivot wasn't a tool or drug. It was changing the question from what can I cut, burn, or drain to should I? That's a philosophical revolution, not just a technological one. Yet, at 2 a.m., in a modern hospital, the confidence lingers. The prospect of surgery still feels like a gamble, except now the room smells of antiseptic and coffee instead of barn straw and broth. The lights are brighter. The consent forms are longer. But inside, we are all staring at the spinning pole. Someone you trust tells you what will happen. The certainty is comforting, even when it's only half-earned. There's a routine to it. Change out of your clothes, answer the same tired questions, wait. You grip the armrest as you might have gripped the stick 600 years ago. You breathe and pretend not to know how little anyone really knows, even now. And so we cycle back. What seems like cruelty is simply the logic of the day, applied with consistency and energy. The barber surgeons were both heroes and monsters, depending on which end of the knife you were on. The sharpness of their tools mattered less than the sharpness of their self-assurance. And you? You were always at their mercy, waiting for the curtain to come down, hoping that the story kept moving forward and didn't end here. The rooms have changed, but the feeling remains. You, waiting. The expert, certain. The outcome, fundamentally uncertain. Humans do not change, only the instruments do. And sometimes the soup is still the best part. Let's start with a myth. The kind that Hollywood really loves. Surgeons in the Middle Ages, red-robed and wild-eyed, hacking into screaming patients by firelight, all gore and chaos, while peasants wail outside the door. You know the story. The total lack of care, the total lack of thought. If you believe the movies, medieval surgery was just advanced butchery. Brutal, mindless, no more sophisticated than slaughtering a pig, except with less planning and probably fewer gloves. Except, that's almost entirely wrong. It's not that it was pleasant. You, lying there on a rough bench that probably once held cheese or mutton, wouldn't call it a spa experience. But the real medieval operating room, if we can call it that, was a much more nuanced, careful, and even, in its way, compassionate place. Yes, the science was flawed. The anatomy was a collection of guesses. And of course there was no anesthesia, unless you count the 100-proof wine they poured down your throat to dull the edges. But surgeons, barber surgeons actually, more on that in a moment, weren't brutish fools. They were doing their best, and often with more care than you'd expect. Here's the part Hollywood absolutely misses. The room wasn't filled with chaos and shrieking. It was usually quiet, a heavy, focused quiet. The surgeon moving quickly and efficiently, not because he didn't care, but because he knew that lingering would only mean more pain, more shock, more risk that you, the person on the stinking straw, wouldn't make it. Sometimes he sent an apprentice to the church to sneak a prayer for you. Sometimes he sent another to fetch your relatives so everyone could say their piece, just in case. There was a routine. Candles, brine, linen, sharp iron, and steady hands. Surgeries were public, but only because everyone knew your odds were better with more witnesses. People remembered if the surgeon botched it, and trust actually mattered. And about all that screaming, yes, sometimes people screamed. Who wouldn't? But often, patients didn't scream at all. The pain was brutal, but the shock sometimes silenced you quicker than the knife did. You might focus on a crack in the wall or the tick of a clock. Well, not a clock, but maybe the drip of water in the corner, or the slow guttering of a candle. In the moments after, many people reported a strange, distant calm, your body's way of cushioning the blow. Not mercy, exactly, but not pure chaos either. And afterward you might be given soup. Always soup, because that was one thing doctors and grandmothers could agree on in every century. Where the movies show a madman with a saw, the records show measured, methodical practice. We still have notebooks, accounts, letters, sometimes even diagrams. And what do those show? A whole spectrum of knowledge. There were surgeons who regularly read Arabic medical texts, because that was where the good ideas were coming from. Others worshipped at the altar of Galen, and ruthlessly copied every outdated idea, because, well, everyone else did. A few even experimented with opium, mandrake, or henbane. Not perfect, often risky, but done with intention. It was not a free-for-all. If anything, the real horror was how much the outcome still depended on timing, luck, and things nobody understood. Let's talk about barber surgeons. These are the real stars. Imagine the guy who cuts your hair also setting your broken leg, pulling your rotten tooth, and, if things go very badly, cutting your arm off. It sounds absurd. In medieval Europe, this seemed completely reasonable. Barbers learned to use sharp tools before most doctors ever touched a blade. They were, in a way, the original multitaskers of medicine. A Swiss Army human. The idea was that learned physicians, the ones who read Latin and talked about the movement of humours, were too precious, too theoretical for the indignity of cutting. Blood was messy beneath them. Cutting was for employees. So you, needing surgery, might stumble into a shop with striped poles out front. Maybe your surgeon smells of rosemary and burnt hair, maybe of lye and sweat. You hope for rosemary, the red and white barber pole? Not just decoration. The pole represented the staff for you to grip during bloodletting, and the red ribbon was supposed to look like a trail of blood winding around your wrist. Not a cheerful image, but at least it was honest advertising. If medieval Twitter existed, barber surgeons would get mixed reviews. Cut my abscess open, would visit again. Soup was salty. 3 stars. Severed wrong toe, but good conversation. 4 stars. Much screaming, but ran a clean shop. Every city had a guild, the Barbers' Guild. Rules, training, regulation, all enforced with what passed for quality control. In London, barber surgeons had to take exams. Some of those exams involved recognizing herbs, others involved how to apply leeches to exactly the right spot. There were even dress codes. You, the patient, might not notice, too distracted by the pounding in your skull or whatever was leaking out of your leg. But there was, at least on paper, a professional standard. More surprising still, surgeons sometimes refused to operate. If they thought you wouldn't survive, they might send you home. Or to the apothecary. The risk of a public death was worse than the loss of a client. If your friend lost an ear in a tavern brawl, the barber might consult neighbours. What do you think? Should we stitch or wait? There was a social process. Sometimes a consultation, not the mad dash Hollywood prefers. In fact, surgeons preferred injuries that weren't bloody, things they could see and handle, not internal issues. The stomach, the chest, the brain, those were places the knives rarely dared to go. Most medieval operations were surface jobs. Abscesses, hernias, ulcers, cataracts, broken bones that poked through the skin. Limbs, unfortunately, were fair game. Hearts? Absolutely not. Pain, though, was always there, no matter what cloth covered your eyes, no matter how many hands you gripped. Surgeons did have tricks. Fast, practiced incisions to minimize torture. Crude opiates, if you were rich or lucky. Herbal intoxicants, poppy or henbane, sometimes wine, sometimes vinegar fumes. None of it worked all that well, but sometimes you felt it in a distant way, or thought you did. Historical reports show that surgeons chatted through the process. Not small talk about the weather, but direct, firm, meant to keep you conscious and compliant. The real difference, there was negotiation. Not with you, really. Nobody asked about your pain preferences, but negotiation with fate, with experience, with risk. The certainty of Hollywood, always directed into action, wasn't real. The real certainty was about process. I have done this before. We hold this arm like that. Sharp knife, boiled bandage, someone fetch some wine, and then, almost always, soup. One myth says medieval people never washed their hands or instruments. That's not quite right, either. Cleanliness before germ theory was more about comfort and ritual than safety. But washing hands, boiling cloth, and rinsing blades was surprisingly common among the better surgeons. They believed bad smells could carry disease, so vinegar washes were routine. Sometimes they rubbed the tools with rosewater, or set bowls of herbs nearby. It wasn't sterile in our sense, but you wouldn't be left with hands covered in mystery goo. At least if the surgeon had any pride. Afterward, you'd be swaddled in linen and propped up near the fire. The house would smell of boiled roots, sweat, and charred wood. Sometimes a surgeon would leave you with a charm, a scrap of parchment with a prayer. Hope and habit, equally vital. The whole experience, surprisingly, was not as solitary as the movies suggest. It was communal, supervised, and often devotional. Someone mumbled scripture, someone made broth. Everyone knew the rules. Few went through it truly alone. And the whole idea of hopeless medieval barbarism, it's just not entirely true. People cared about survival, about comfort, about trying new things. Recipes from the time included pain remedies, wound salves, and advice about keeping wounds open or closed, depending on the season and the patient's constitution. The approach could be surprisingly customized when you had the luck to fall into the hands of a thoughtful barber surgeon. The Hollywood image is gorier, louder, simpler, and much more comforting for the viewer who gets to be safely modern, looking backward through sanitized glass. The real past is messier, slower, often more humane, and frankly, more familiar than you might want to admit. When you woke up, assuming you did, you weren't just grateful for the lack of pain. You were grateful for continuity, for a face you recognized, for the soup, for the sunlight, however weak, filtering through the window. Because the core reality, the one Hollywood never bothers with, is that people then were doing what people do now, making it up with the best information available, following the local rules, cutting as little and as carefully as possible, grasping at certainty in a world defined by risk, and blaming authority when it all went wrong. Why does this matter? Because absurd, medieval mistakes are not really a medieval problem. It's a human problem. To watch an episode of modern medical drama is to see the same belief in process, the same negotiation with risk. The only difference is what we call the tools. and whether or not your insurance will cover the cost of anesthesias. If you could have looked the medieval surgeon in the eye and explained germs, or capillaries, or how to use a functioning anesthesia machine, he wouldn't have seemed monstrous. He would have been interested, maybe suspicious, and probably jealous. And he would have asked about your guild, your credentials, your beard. In a way, medieval surgery without anesthesia was not just about pain. It was about the limits of certainty, the shape of knowledge before it hardens into dogma. The reality that, with all the data in the world, outcomes are only ever partly in your hands. That sense, lying back, staring at the rafters, waiting for the knife and for morning, while someone assures you it'll be quick, is not so different from the nervous anticipation outside a modern operating theatre. The tools change. The waiting does not. Humans do not change. Only the instruments do. What does all of this actually reveal? It's tempting, at 3 a.m., to think that things are different now. That uncertainty was a medieval problem, that we've replaced chaos with pure knowledge. But the truth is, all the confidence in the room, the surgeon humming while he scrubs, the patient clenching the chair, is mostly theatre. Necessary theatre, but theatre all the same. It turns out, confidence is as much a tool as the knife, a performance to keep you still, to convince the patient, you, and the crowd, and sometimes even the surgeon himself, that something meaningful is about to happen. In medieval times it was ritual. The pole, the linen, the soup, the scripture whispered under breath, the incense swinging just so. Today, it's the badge swipe, the latex gloved handshake, the reassuring, this will only take a minute. There is always a kind of magic in the room, a symphony of small signals designed to assure everyone that we know what we're doing. But beneath that magic, there's still uncertainty. We live in the age of protocol and policy. The policies may be smarter, the protocols more evidence-based. But the principle is still the same. Follow the steps, trust the plan, hope for the best. And survival, then as now, depends on luck and on the willingness to trust someone louder and more certain than yourself. The real lesson from medieval surgery is simple and a little disappointing. Survival belongs to those who did everything right and still got lucky. The wrong patient, in the wrong season, with the wrong infection, no expertise could save you. The right patient, in the right moment, with the right mix of care and improvisation, and you stood a chance, no matter how blunt the knife. Our modern love of certainty is comforting, but it's not a cure for chaos. It never was so. If you're lying awake tonight, finding yourself haunted by things done to other people, in other centuries, you can take a little comfort in this. We've always been waiting together, lighting candles, murmuring prayers or statistics, hoping the instruments do their work. The only thing that changes is the sound of the clock, or the drip, or the candle guttering, or the buzz of the hallway light. Everything else is just a different version of now. If you're here at 3 a.m. wondering what's wrong with you, nothing is. You're exactly where you belong. This is just a version of the midnight waiting room. You, half awake, letting these stories play across the inside of your eyelids, maybe listening for a sound outside your window, or the hush of nighttime traffic. Maybe your phone light casts odd shadows on the wall. That's normal. This is a gentle reminder that history is a loop, and we're all winding our way through fog and doubt, holding on to the rituals that make us feel safe. So, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always interesting, seeing little lights on the map. If you want more, you can subscribe. That way, the next episode finds you when you're ready for it, and not a moment sooner. And I'll see you in the next video. Until then, turn your pillow over to the cool side. Drink some water. And remember, the strangest thing about history is never the story itself, but the way it repeats with a new soundtrack. If you stick around, you'll start to notice. The midnight cures always get stranger, the further you look back. See you soon.